Good evening. Welcome to our event. Thanks for coming along on a Wednesday night. I know you've got many other things you could be doing, but appreciate you joining us here tonight. I'm Jackie Fernley, General Manager of LegalVision Australia, and I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm going to introduce our panellists first, although it would be good if my clicker worked. Thank you. It's magic. We have Carla Penn, co-founder and CEO of Peak, Lauren McKee, practice leader at LegalVision, and Jason Andrew, director at SBO Financial. Might have each of you quickly introduce yourselves and what you do within your businesses, please.
So my name's Lauren. I'm a practice leader here at LegalVision. I work in our commercial and regulatory team, so I do lots of work with contracts and also regulatory work. So specifically privacy, lots of Australian consumer law work, marketing, and yeah, I work with a lot of e-commerce and tech SaaS businesses.
I'm the co-founder and CEO of Profit Peak. Fun fact, second business with my husband. We're still married. And I've been an e-commerce operator for 10 years, bootstrapped to exit 4 profitable e-commerce brands, and then spun out the tech that we did that, which is what Profit Peak is today. And this is my accountant, and this is my legal firm.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm Carl's accountant. I'm one of the directors of SBO Financial, so we're like an outsourced finance function and tax practice. Been around for 10 years. I also own a private equity fund where we acquire really boring businesses off boomers.
Typically boomers, is that a requirement for that? Yeah,
pretty much.
I like that. Okay, look, tonight our expert panel will be talking through their operational, financial and legal tips, tricks and personal experiences on how to accelerate the growth of your e-commerce business. We'll open the floor to questions at the end. Often we have people wanting to ask throughout the session. We've got a small group this evening. So if you can note down the questions, we'll make sure we don't miss them at the end. After we finish, we'd love to see all the food and drink consumed, so please stick around and network. And we will also share, following the session, a summary for you all to have, and we'll ask for feedback as well, which we'd really appreciate. So we can customize the content this evening. Curious to know if anyone this evening feels that they either that they are or may be impacted by the tariff changes in the US that have been announced, whether you manufacture in China or sell in the US. Nope. Cool. All right. Well, we won't cover that tonight. We'll probably run a separate session so that we don't bore those not interested. Wonderful. Okay. We're going to cover hopefully some interesting topics and give you some nuggets to take away from tonight. We'll talk about financial performance and sort of optimizing that, which I think is critical before we talk then about how do you scale your business with solid financial foundations. And then managing legal and regulatory risks as well, the sexiest part of the session, if I can say. We'll share some key takeaways and open up for questions. Okay, kicking off with financial performance then. Jason or Carla, when it comes to North Star sort of key metrics, which KPIs should e-commerce businesses prioritize to really gauge performance and growth?
So I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. I think like accounting and financial statements is usually a lot of mumbo jumbo for a lot of folks, particularly first-time entrepreneurs who, in my experience, a lot of fall them into e-commerce because they see a couple of dropship videos on TikTok or whatever. So I like to keep things really simple for that reason. So I usually recommend people focus on 5 metrics, and that's a lot. It's literally a handful. Revenue is obviously one, like you want to know how much sales you're making. My concern is a lot of people just obsess over that metric alone, right? So sales are important, but it's not the only thing that matters. The second metric I really want people to understand and focus on is gross profit. So when I talk about gross profit, that is your revenue less the cost to deliver your product to your customer. So it's obviously like the cost of the widget that you're selling, and then also all the delivery fees, your merchant fees, all that sort of stuff. That's where you get to your gross profit. I look at net profit or EBITDA. I would just use profit, which is basically your gross profit less all your running expenses, like rent, wages, subscriptions, and stuff like that. And then I like to look at cash flow. So there's a metric called free cash flow, which doesn't actually always translate to profit. So again, not getting too in depth about this. A lot of people obsess about profit and revenue, but cash is the thing that actually pays your bills, right? Like you can't pay bills with profit. So really understanding the cash flow of your business that's been generated as opposed to just your paper profit is really important. And so, yeah, they're probably just the basics of where to start. And usually if you keep all those up and to the right, like you'll do pretty well, I think. Obviously, there's nuances between that, but yeah, they're the ones I would usually advise to look at. What do you think, Carla?
Then from an e-commerce lens specifically, I would add in probably 3 more metrics. The first is new customer. So what is the incremental new customer revenue and profit that you're driving? Because the only way that you scale your business is that you are generating incremental growth. And you're not sitting in that bottom of funnel demand and just hitting the same customer base. And then also what's really important in any business is, are you retaining customers? So what is that retention, revenue and profit? Also really important though is that it's not all coming from ad sources. So what else are you doing to drive that bottom of funnel conversion and keeping your customers? And then the third one is, if you are scaling with ads, gross profit on ad spend is your North Star metric. So for every dollar you invest in ads, how many dollars of gross profit are you generating for your business? Not revenue. Because revenue is not equal.
Great. And Jason, you touched on this, but can you, I mean, I know it's particularly relevant for our e-commerce clients who can have quite extended supply chains and cash implications of those. The real distinction between profit and cash flow, and why getting very clear on that and understanding it is critical.
Yeah, definitely. So I like to think of this as a timeline, right? So if you're an e-commerce retailer, or if you actually sell any physical product, irrespective of whether you sell them a bricks and mortar chain or online, doesn't really matter. If you think about your supply chain, so most people will import some sort of product from China. That's just typically where everything is made nowadays. So typically you put your purchase order in with your manufacturer over in China. They'll say, great, it's going to take me 3 weeks to produce your widget. You're like, cool, I'll wait 3 weeks. Then what they'll do is they'll send you an invoice. Well, sorry, at that day 0, they'll make you pay a deposit, actually. So like, cool, I'll make this widget, but you're going to have to pay me 30% of the total container that you're going to make you. So immediately from day 0, you're out of pocket 30% of the cost of the goods, right? And you've got no sales. I mean, you haven't sold anything. You're just buying the stuff. So you're immediately out of pocket 30% of the cost of your product. And then you wait a month for it to be produced. And then they say, hey, we've made your product. We're going to put it into a shipping container and we're going to send it to you, right? So can you like organize a freight guy to like ship it from China to Sydney? Like, can you do that? And like, yeah, I guess I can do that. So you organize that. And then at the same time, they're going to issue an invoice and say, but I'm not going to let the stock leave China until you pay my invoice because I want to make sure I get paid. So suddenly you're up for another the 70% of the cost of the container. So you're up for that. And remember, you haven't sold anything yet. You're just trying to buy the stuff. So you're immediately out 100% of the cash, right, without making any sales. It takes another 6 weeks for it to land somewhere at, some port, somewhere. And then what you need to do is pay a guy to pick up that stock and deliver it to your warehouse, which is nowhere near the harbour, right? So you pay another guy to do that. And you've already paid the guy to ship it to Sydney. And then it lands in your warehouse, and then you have to unpack it, and then you need to put it into your warehouse, and then you have to list it online and sell it, right? So that whole process probably would take 4, 5, maybe sometimes 6 months, right? That's not even no sales. That's just getting set up, right? And that's ignoring all the rents you have to pay in your warehouse, all the staff you have to pay to pick and pack all that stock, right? So immediately you're out of cash flow from literally day 0. And then you go online and you set up your Shopify store, you run some ads and pray to the Lords that you might make a sale of your widget. And hope that the ads that you spend are less than the profit that you make on the cost of sale, the gross profit you make on the product, right? So if you do get to that stage, let's just say that you land your first container, you sell some widgets on your P&L, it might show that you're profitable on the units that you've sold, right? You might have sold a handful of goods, you made profit on those items, but you still got no cash. Right, so where's the cash going? And the reality is the cash is in your warehouse. You've got all your stock sitting there piled up, that's not moving, and there's a classic example of having profit on your paper but no cash flow because it's literally sitting in your warehouse, right? So that's a very basic but real example of why your profit doesn't equal cash flow. which is kind of to my point before, people obsessing over just your paper profit is kind of irrelevant. You really need to understand what is your cash flow cycle. So the key to retailers is, how do I then move that stock, right? How do I make my profit closer to my cash flow so that the numbers kind of are the same, or loosely the same? And that's where you need to start to look at other metrics, to look at stock turnover or other KPIs to see how quickly you turn that stock over. So you're essentially converting the stuff in your warehouse into cash in your bank account. So that's kind of a thing. And we call that the cash conversion cycle, which essentially measures in days how much time it takes to convert your profit into cash. That's essentially the thing. It's like a game of golf. You want to get that number as low as possible, so that basically for every dollar of profit you make, that instantly turns into cash as quickly as you can. That's the game.
Great. Lauren, from a legal perspective, what should e-commerce business owners be thinking about to secure their foundations and ultimately help them with their financial performance?
I think a couple of things as a starting point. Setting up a company, a proprietary limited company, that helps from a number of perspectives. One is to limit any sort of personal risk you're taking on by setting up your business. But secondly, if you've got big growth plans going into the future, or you've got other businesses or individuals that want to invest in your business, that is the key sort of channel to do that. The next thing would, of course, be your terms and conditions. Now, we've got strict laws in Australia, the Australian consumer law, unfair contract terms laws. So I guess you'll find that a lot of terms and conditions look the same. But where I think a lot of customers are going to look are your returns policies, your shipping and delivery policies. You want to make sure they're nice and clear. You're not running into any sort of issues with your customers because you haven't been super clear on what you're doing, and also building that trust with customers and building up a good reputation. I think the other thing that, perhaps not straight away, but once you sort of realize you're onto a good thing, that you want to have a think about is protecting your branding. So, we all know plenty of big brands. Apple, for example, we've got the Apple logo, the Apple name. It's got nothing to do with phones or tech. It's a piece of fruit, but we all associate it with that. So if you're onto something good, you might want to have a think about protecting that branding by way of a trademark. So that would be either a logo, the name, or both. Once you protect that, it'll give you protection for 10 years. And what it means is that someone else is going to go start selling the same thing as you under the same brand. You can ask them to stop, which is obviously important if you've put a lot of effort into that marketing, a lot of money behind that. And secondly, I suppose, so you can stop those people from doing it, but also it sort of disincentivises someone from feeding you to the post and registering that first.
Jason, we all now, I think, appreciate cash flow is critical to understand. What are some tactical or practical tips you can give us on accurate cash flow forecasting and budgeting to help support business growth?
Yeah, I'm gonna be straight up. Cash flow forecasting is really, really difficult, and mainly, particularly in like retail environments, you have no freaking idea how to forecast revenue. And I was just like, most people, there's some people that might say, oh, you can look at like analytics and look at repeat customer rates, and like, yeah, you can, but you're just making that up fundamentally, unless you've got a subscription product where people are regularly buying from you because you are direct debiting their bank account. You can't forecast your revenue. It's really, really hard. You can look at trends and look at like, last year we did this, or this time last year we did that revenue, and that can form a base. You might be able to look at, your return ad spend metrics and say, well, if I can plunk $1 into Facebook or Meta, that usually translates to $5 of revenue. So in theory, every more dollars I put in, more dollars come out. That's a way of doing it. But again, unless you're really being specific about segmenting your customers and new customers, of course, retain customers, etc. It's really, really challenging, right? So I like to take a very conservative view. Being an accountant, I am fairly risk averse. So I do a bottom up. We call it a bottom up budget, right? And this is like just a dorky finance term. What you do is just work out all your costs of your business. What are the things that you know are going to cost you money? Fixed costs is the technical term, but you think like, what's my rent? What's my payroll every month or week? What are my subscriptions? And that, that's the thing you do know are your costs. You then work out, well, cool, what margin or what contribution margin, what gross profit, or use gross profit as the same term for now. What is my margin? and that is your sales less your cost of sales. What is that percentage? What is my ad spend that I budget? That's another percent, and you functionally work out your break-even costs. So like basically, what are the amount of sales I need to make every single day just to stay in business, just to cover all of my fixed costs. So I usually just start with that, and so in the back of your head, let's just say that number is $1,000 a day. If I don't sell $1,000 a day of shit, I'm going backwards, like literally going backwards. I'm losing money, right? So that just sets a nice anchor to, okay, I need to sell $1,000, right? And that's just to stay in business. And then you can start to reverse and work out, cool, if I sell $1,200 of stock a day, what profit does that spit out? And so you can start to reverse engineer it. I find that's the best way, not necessarily to forecast revenue, but set targets for yourself, because otherwise, you can just assume that chasing higher revenue figures are better, but if you're blowing out ad spend dollars at the same time, you kind of go backwards. So it's what I would encourage everyone to do is look at your P&L daily. You can just do it for a spreadsheet or something like Profit Peak. But yeah, look at your P&L every day and just try and make money every day. That's as simple as it gets, and that will compound over time. And there'll be good days and bad days. Like you might make more one day, you might lose the other day, but on average, you should be working towards that. That's probably the easiest way to do it without confusing people.
I certainly don't look at the P&L every day, but should do that more often. But great, thank you.
Spend.
Well, we are. We do
Oh, you
spend a
are?
lot on ads, yeah.
You've got a lot of money.
Embarrassing amount. Okay, let's talk about scaling now. I think we've hopefully got some good points hit with financial performance. Carla, the most common myths about scaling revenue on ad spend or ROAS, and how can we e-commerce businesses avoid falling into that?
Yeah, the first trap is when you put your credit card in, right? So at that point, you've lost control over your advertising budget because you are handing over your credit card to Google, Meta, potentially TikTok, Pinterest, Bing. So the most important thing you can do day zero is actually work out how much you are prepared to invest, right? So don't just hand over the credit card and just throw a $1,000 budget there. Actually think about how much you're investing, because now this is impacting your cash flow, right? Straight away. It's going to impact profit, but it's going to impact your cash flow really, really quickly because you don't get any terms from Google, right? Day one, you put your credit card in. Yeah, your credit card company is going to give you 30 days, but Google's not. They're starting to bill you every $100 when they trust you, every $500, then every $1,000, then sometimes even every $10,000 as you scale. So first know how much you're investing and that you've got the cash to pay that credit card bill when it comes, because 20% is hard to find on an e-commerce P&L if you're paying interest on your credit card. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that not all revenue is equal. So when you first start an e-commerce business, you may only have a single product. At that stage, revenue is equal, because whether you sell product A or product A, you're still getting about the same amount of gross profit. But as you scale, you go into other categories, right? Other products, and your margins start to vary. And if you start optimizing for revenue and you've got varied margins, you can very quickly become unprofitable. And that's one of the number one reasons businesses become unprofitable. Because when you scale for revenue on ad spend, you're assuming that every dollar of revenue is worth the same amount of profit. But if you've got different margin, you're making different money, right? So I say the number one thing that businesses can do to make a change today is to stop optimizing for revenue on ad spend and stop optimizing for either two different points. The first is gross profit on ad spend, which Jason touched on, is obviously your product cost less the COGS, the cost of the sales for that product, or even better, start optimizing for contribution margin. So if you're optimizing for contribution margin, you're actually subtracting that ad spend investment and those variable costs, like your merchant fees, your shipping costs. And then what you can actually say is, instead of $1 of ad spend buys me $3 of revenue, you can start to say, actually $1 of ad spend buys me $2 of contribution profit. And I know that if I generate $200 of contribution profit a day, I'm at break even on day 7 with my fixed costs. And that's how you trade and scale profitably. But you can't do it with revenue, because revenue doesn't always eventuate either, right? You're going to look at your cash flow and you're going to go, oh, I can't meet these bills and I'm going to discount everything 70% really quickly to get some more cash, right? And then you're even more unprofitable and you get yourself into a spiral down.
Great. And you perhaps touched on a lever here, but are there any other key levers that e-com businesses should or can use to manage and optimize cash flow?
Yeah, I think going back to the inventory piece. So there's a key term I use to throw around a lot, which is growing broke, which is just because you're growing doesn't mean you're making money. So we spoke about inventory being the key piece there, and I'll probably more broadly talk about working capital. So working capital, everyone looks at their P&L as like, hey, my income, my expenses, cool, I'm making money. But there's this thing called the balance sheet, which like pretty much no one looks at except accountants. And what the balance sheet is actually probably more important than the P&L, to be frank, but that shows all the assets and liabilities that you have. So working capital is essentially like 3 accounts in your balance sheet. There's inventory, which is the big one, which every e-com business has. Accounts payable, which is like money I owe to other people. And sometimes there's accounts receivable. So if you're like an omni-channel retailer, you'll have like wholesale, for example, you might sell to Maya or DJs or something, and they'll say, yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll buy that stuff with you, but I want to pay for like 90 days. So yeah, if you're lucky, right? So good luck. So what they're trying to do is optimize their cycle, because they want to, if the more money you have kept in your bank account, the better, right? So everyone's playing this game of like, how much cash can I keep in my bank account instead of paying other people? So the great thing about e-commerce is that when you sell online, you're pretty much being paid in a day. Like, a customer, buys you a t-shirt, whatever you're buying, and then, they'll pay with their credit card. Stripe or Shopify might sit in it for a day, but it'll land in your bank account the next day or a couple of days later. But if you're selling wholesale to another company, they won't pay you for ages. So you have to really manage that accounts receivable balance. Anyway, so going back to working capital is essentially 3 accounts. It's your inventory plus your accounts receivable. So that stuff sucks up cash. That's bad. You want to make those as low as possible. And then accounts payable is money you owe to other people. So working capital is your inventory plus accounts receivable less accounts payable. The sum of that is your thing called working capital. You want to make that, again, as low as possible. If it's too large, what can happen is that as you scale your business or you grow your revenue, you need to buy more inventory. And so you're buying it. And, if you're selling more wholesale, your revenue is going up, your profit goes up, but then you're also having to wait 90 days for every sale to get paid, right? So what can happen is as you grow your sales, your business consumes more cash and it generates profit. And so what can happen is that you actually go backwards and you actually bleed cash despite you being profitable, because all of it's tied up in this working capital account. And that's when you're like, oh, holy shit, like what's going on here? Why have I got no money? I need to make payroll tomorrow and I've got no cash, but my P&L says I'm making money. And that's a working capital problem. So what most people do is like, shit, I'll go talk to like, all those online lenders like Wayflyer or Shopify Capital, because they'll give you instant money basically, but like 25, sometimes 30% interest rates. And yeah, it literally crushes your business. That's, those loans, that debt can like basically kill all your profit altogether and you end up going backwards. So yeah, growing broke is a really, really important lesson for any business that has high degrees of working capital, which is basically a lot of e-commerce brands. And going back to that cash conversion cycle thing I mentioned before, that's a really good way of keeping track of that to make sure that you're turning your stock really quickly. Not ordering too much, this is the trade-off, right? Because if you have, everyone wants to have stock in their warehouse because you need stock to make sales. You carry too much stock, you got too much cash tied up in your working capital, which can bleed your cash flow. You got too little stock, you have nothing to sell, right? Because you're stocked out. So it's like navigating that it's a really tricky art. And yeah, no one can nail it really. It's just really difficult, but that's another thing you need to keep your eyes on.
Add something. I see this mistake a lot with early stage businesses, e-commerce and any. But when you've traded more than, I think it's $70,000 and you got to start paying GST and you haven't reserved any money for your GST. So make sure you're actually putting cash aside each month for your super payments to your staff, your BAS and your GST. That's actually not cash that's yours to play with. That's cash that you owe your employees and the government, and they will come for you and wind you up to get it. So don't play with that. Those are the bills that have to be paid first.
Yeah, just on a really easy way to manage that is every month, everyone should have 3 bank accounts in their business. One is like your transactions account, money goes in, money goes out, whatever. Second account is for your taxes. So all those things that Carla spoke about, if you're on a monthly PAYG cycle, you're on quarterly BAS or maybe monthly BAS, you got superannuation, you got to put aside every quarter. Go into your accounting system like Xero or QuickBooks, whatever you're using, generate a report, and that'll actually tell you what you owe that month in taxes. And you just transfer that money to that second bank account and just label that bank account do not touch. Like that's literally like your taxes account. Do not touch that money. It's not yours. It's other people's money. Don't touch it. And then what happens is over time that bucket will fill up. Your third bank account, actually I say 4 bank, let's say 3. The third bank account just carries all of your other just surplus cash. So if you're making profit, you should have that third bank account, so it should start to fill up over time, hopefully. And then that's the money you can actually spend, and you can just use that to reinvest back into growth, or you can take dividends or whatever you want. It's really your call to do with your money. But like, yeah, just don't touch the second bucket because that's not your money.
Carla, I imagine profitability is a big point with this, but how can we determine the right product offering to scale? And once we've selected it, how many channels to market should we choose?
The best advice I can give you is test one market at a time. So customer journey is really, really complex in e-commerce. It's not as simple as, opening a store in Westfield and someone walking past the door and your rent's fixed. So when you open an e-commerce store day one, it's like holding a sign saying we're open in Timbuktu. So no one knows you exist. So you're going to have to spend ad budget, or you're going to have to do some guerrilla marketing on Reddit, or you're going to have to try and get viral on TikTok or whatever it might be to drive people to your website and hope that those people convert. Now, find one motion. Like it's the same even for me now in SaaS with go-to-market strategy. Find one motion, nail it. And what I think a lot of people in e-commerce do is that they test so many different things, they actually don't know what's actually working. And also potentially when something's about to work, because consumers don't buy the first time they interact with your brand. That's actually quite rare. We all don't do that. We want to build up trust, right? And so sometimes it takes a bit of time before a customer's actually willing to pull the trigger. And I think a lot of people turn off that motion that's actually working just as it's about to start working. And then they try something else and go, oh, this is really working. And now I'm just going to ride with this and try this and try this and try this. So I think start with one motion. Whether the first motion is putting a little ad budget behind a meta campaign, for example. Let that meta campaign get airtime, start seeing the results and keep control of the budget before you say, I'm going to throw money behind TikTok, right? And see what the unit economics are like in your business that you get from that meta campaign before you start testing anything else. Because once you add in another market, you've got Meta and TikTok both claiming the sale. So what will tend to happen is you go and look at your Meta campaigns and you go and look at your TikTok campaigns and it says, wow, you did $60,000 in revenue. But then you look at your Shopify and you go, oh, there's $36,000 there, but that actually includes GST. So that's $36,000 is not all mine, right? So test one market at a time and also think smart about how you scale. So if you're building a direct-to-consumer brand, but you know wholesale is a channel that you want to penetrate, maybe you actually want to go wholesale first and let all these stores build your brand awareness for you because people are going in the stores, touching and feeling your product. Or you may want to do the converse and you say, actually, I want to drive the demand first myself, and then I want to go and look at wholesaling my product to other people. I've seen 2 different examples of this really recently. One is where the first strategy worked really, really well because they had a really low cost per acquisition, which is what it costs to acquire a customer, because there was so much brand awareness, because they managed to get really strong distribution into stores. And then I know another business, which is a lingerie business, that's just gone themselves into David Jones, for example, but they've built a direct-to-consumer business for the last 4 years. But what they've actually noticed as soon as they got into David Jones, their cost per acquisitions online went down because they've suddenly got more brand awareness. The other thing I think that's super underestimated in e-commerce is the power of Reddit. So actually thinking about guerrilla marketing. So there are people constantly on Reddit saying, I want to know what the best product is to buy for this. They even talk about employers on there. So you can even find about your future. If you go and you stop being entrepreneurs and go for a job, you can find out a lot about an employer on a Reddit forum. But it's the same with product. So everywhere your customer is, you can think about how you test, how you reach that customer where they are. And a lot of people know and see through influencer marketing these days because they can see it's a sponsored Instagram post. But if they see a whole bunch of people talking about a product in Reddit that it's actually fantastic, but that person's also talked about 50 other products before, not just your product, there's a lot of value in that because that's what's called user-generated content, which you also want to build up on your website, but that's user-generated content in your forums. And there's also value in that in terms of search algorithms and how you start ranking and getting organic traffic, not just paid traffic. So thinking about not just going straight for that ad budget, but testing different motions, giving it time, and really being quite thoughtful in how you do it. Otherwise, you spend way too much money and you don't know what's working.
Great. Lauren, any legal risks to be watching out for while we're in this scaling phase of our business?
I think just on marketing, I suppose, as you grow, you'll find yourself having email addresses from here, there, and everywhere. Making sure you've got good systems in place, like a good CRM, where you know where your email addresses and different contact details have come from, such that as you grow and in a few years' time and you want to reach out to these people through marketing campaigns, you know where they've come from and whether or not you're allowed to send marketing to those people through under spam laws. So whether or not you got consent, whether that was express or inferred. I know that recently, last year, I think it was, the CBA got fined $7.5 million for spam, essentially. So sending emails out and messages out, not actioning when people click an unsubscribe function. So keeping on top of that as you grow, you want to make sure that your business isn't in the news for the wrong reasons. I suppose the other thing in terms of growing is your contracts. So as you grow, you've obviously got contracts with suppliers, manufacturers, and I guess the more negotiation power you have, the better. But that's where it sort of comes in what you said down there with respect to sort of pricing and when you're going to make payment, who's going to be responsible if there's issues with the goods that you're buying or that are being manufactured, and making sure you can put as much risk back on the supplier as possible.
And I suppose being prepared to renegotiate. If things go well in a year's time, you're larger and you're buying at greater quantities, you should feel comfortable to try to see if you can get better, more favorable payment terms or risk allocation.
I think so. And if you've got a good price going, you want to maybe negotiate that you can, lock that in for a longer period of time.
Yeah, great. Carla, I think everyone knows loyalty is golden. Any tips for us on how to cultivate more of that with our customers?
I think loyalty is more tied to brand than discounts, personally. So if we look at retailers like McKee, you very rarely see a discount, if ever. And that's because of a strong brand. So it's partly their brand, but also the private brands that they distribute into the market. So if you want to get access to their brands, you have to buy from McKee. So that's a really, really smart strategy, starting with that. That builds loyalty, because as customers become familiar with that product, you're the only retailer that you can get that product from. So that helps with loyalty day one. But also a really big part of loyalty is actually how you engage as a brand with your customers. And that's not just your brand, McKee. McKee's not a good example of this, but Arms of Eve is a great example of this. Kerry, the founder of Arms of Eve, is amazing at presenting her brand story as the founder of Arms of Eve. So when she talks about her experience on buying trips, and we can even think of Showpo's founder, when they speak about their journeys as entrepreneurs, their journeys as building their brand, they're really connecting, engaging with their core audience in a very authentic way. And that's building brand awareness and loyalty without actually having to give away dollars to get customers back. And so what we typically see in the data is customers who shop for discounts come back for discounts, and you don't actually get more revenue from that customer, you just bring forward the revenue. So they may have planned to shop with you twice over the next 12 months, and it's just that they shop with you month 4 because you offered a discount, and month 8 because you offered a discount. It's not actually that they gave you extra money or share of wallet, you just brought the purchase forward. So that's what we typically see with lifetime value against discounting. And I think so much can be said as well for community, like LegalVision's offering their community value today by having an event. So it's the same for an e-commerce business. If you do a pop-up and you invite your customers to come and engage with your brand, or you put out content that educates your audience, those are all ways that you connect on a human level with your customers, and that's how you build loyalty, not you can get 10% off, because they're just looking for the next person with a 10% off.
We've peppered through some of the legal and regulatory risks, Lauren, but is there anything else that you'd want to touch on that we today should be thinking about around managing our risk efficiently and not overcomplicating things, which I think lawyers certainly like to do, perhaps accountants on occasion? How do we keep it simple but make sure we're covering the core bases?
I think probably the main thing we haven't touched on today is the Australian consumer law. So under the Australian consumer law, you're going to have obligations as a business to provide sell goods that, they work. They are what you say they're going to be. If someone asks for a red t-shirt, you give them the red one, not the blue one. And also obligations with respect to misleading and deceptive conduct. I'm sure we've all sort of seen strange and marketing strategies. If you're doing any sort of price comparisons with other websites, or you're making claims about your products that are not true, then the ACCC, Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, might be knocking on your door. So I suppose these things can get complicated, but I guess you want to be honest and authentic in your marketing. Make sure that everything that you say and that you're representing about your business is true, and you can back that up. That should go a long way in helping you there. And then, if you're getting any sort of customer complaints or people bringing things back to you, making sure you're dealing with them in a punctual manner, I suppose, and in a way that is not going to negatively impact your brand.
RRPs. I think a lot is going to start, in my opinion, happening with businesses who never actually sell at an RRP. So when you bring in a product and you price with an RRP, but you never actually sell at that RRP, if you ever get picked up by the Australian Consumer Law, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my legal advice, but I looked into this a lot when I had my own business. You need to be able to prove that you actually established RRP before you discounted. So don't go and launch a business that says the RRP of the product $79.95, but you only ever sold it for $59.95. As you grow, a customer may actually make a complaint about the fact that you've established a false RRP. And then you're going to have to be able to show somehow in your Shopify data that you actually established that RRP at some point in time. And I think it might be 6 weeks, or there's actually a period marker.
The day before isn't going to cut it. And you see big businesses all the time getting done for this, and it's not necessarily just with a complaint. Obviously the ACCC's got their eye on bigger businesses, but certainly, yes, advertising at a big discount when it's not actually a discount is going to run into problems.
Isn't there like a meme on that for Black Friday? It's like, hold, and it's like the same price, and they jack it up and then discount back to the same price. But yeah, dodge.
It's like the supermarkets when it's the
aren't
same
around
price
particularly
behind.
anymore. Well, one of the ones that was very famous for doing that and was one of the early e-commerce businesses isn't here today, but that wasn't their fault. That was Westbar.
Great. Hopefully we've hit on some useful, interesting points worth just touching on. We won't read through these, but these are some of the key takeaways that the panel's touched on that we want to leave with you to hopefully reflect on and think about how they apply in your business. We'll send a copy of this to you, so I'm not sure if everyone's read it yet. Give you another second. Awesome. Obviously, we've covered some general tips and tricks this evening, but to get some really personal advice and guidance and support, you want to talk to the experts and perhaps form a relationship if you don't already have a provider in place supporting you in these areas. Of course, you can reach out to Carla with her email and contact number there. You can take a picture of it or grab her afterwards to chat about how Profit Peak could support you, as well as Jason at SBO. His contact info is there. And I think SBO is you've got a big focus in e-commerce, and that's a real niche for them. So if you don't have a great accounting provider, or if you do, but perhaps they're not experts in your category, worth a chat. And LegalVision, we'll happily plug ourselves, are a law firm. We do a lot of work with online businesses. We sort of are one ourselves, I suppose. We've got an office, but we support businesses all across Australia and New Zealand. And our primary way that we provide support is through a membership, so that you've got sort of transparency around your fees for fixed monthly cost to provide all of your business as usual legal support, covered off what that might look like for a kind of standard business. And that's naturally getting things set up, ensuring that you stay protected and updating things as your business invariably changes or the law changes around you. We will happily have a chat with you and give you some initial pointers on where we think there might be opportunities for you to get legally compliant or improve. And grab us if you'd like to chat. We'll also send through a survey after this, and in there you can opt in to get to have a conversation with our team if you'd like. But enough about that. Any questions for our panel? Yes. Can I steal someone to, do the mic run?
This is a question probably for Jason, potentially Carla. So as a business scales, you have the options of debt, essentially. So you've got debt, line of credits, you've got the Shopify and other things. How would you balance a debt strategy with the seasonal spikes that you get in a traditional e-commerce that might spike in November or December, as an example?
I'll just say you need a lot of margin in e-commerce if you want debt. Because most of the debt providers that will lend to you in e-commerce are going to charge you anywhere between 20 and 30%. So it's a bit like having your credit card running with debt on it. And most e-commerce P&Ls that I see typically have a gross margin of around 70 to 80%, and then they don't even have an EBITDA of 10% of revenue. So once you add in that 20 to 30% debt, it's very hard to run a profitable business. You've probably seen more than me.
Yeah, I think Joel, right? Yeah. How's it going? It's a really tricky question. So everyone wants a ideally trade finance facility, like with the big four bank, but like that's hard to get if you've got a track record of, at least like 3 years of trading history and consistent profits and all that sort of stuff, right? So banks are a pain in the butt to get money from. And understandably, they're trying to protect their risk, right? That being said, you can do it with a guarantee of your home. Or if you own some hard assets, they'll happily give you money as long as they secure themselves against a hard asset. So signing up to personal guarantees is probably something that everyone has got at some stage of their journey or about to if you get into entrepreneurship. So number one, probably get comfortable with signing a personal guarantee and of a bank having collateral over your house. And then in terms of like, if you're not comfortable with that, that's what you need, right? That's what you want is ideally unsecured, but trade finance facility. That's the dream. And how that works typically is banks will say, hey, we'll give you, let's say $500,000 to manage your working capital. So the inventory stuff I spoke about before. You've got some containers coming, cool, buy it, use your trade finance facility to fund that stock. And, from purchase order to landing in your warehouse, that could roughly be 3 months typically. And that's typically the revolver of a trade finance facility. It's like a 39-day cycle. So the theory is that when the stock lands, you've already paid for it, and then you've got stock to sell, and then the profit that you make from the sale of that stock can cover the interest plus make money, right? That's how it typically works. But to Carla's point, you need a pretty sufficient, you need buffer anyway, just to cover the interest, irrespective of the cost of that interest. But obviously, not everyone can get access to bank trade finance facilities until they're much more mature. And so typically what most people do is rely on credit cards and or, Wayflyer or Shopify Capital and the rates of 20, 30%. So how I've seen it being funded is that if you typically fund by customers, so like a few of the clients I've worked with, they've grown really quickly, have done some sort of crowdfunding campaign and tried to pre-sell stock, and that helps kickstart the journey. Doesn't solve the scaling problem, but with a bit of track record, they've got some stuff to go to a bank with and say, hey, give me a facility. That's how I've seen it. But yeah, outside of that, friends and family. I think a lot of e-commerce entrepreneurs tend to try to bootstrap their way to starting from scratch. I'm not against taking equity if you have that option and raising a bit of money just to get off the ground and de-risk it. Because if you genuinely have a great product that's defensible and enduring, raise a bit of equity and try to use that to float yourself as opposed to just bet the house. The challenge with business is that it's your personal finances and your business finances are often the same in the early stage. And so, you just have to think about how much risk you're taking and how much you're willing to bet the house on what you're doing.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you.
There's no answer to. I didn't really answer your question, did I?
I did have a follow-up question, if that's all right. So just on, obviously you've kind of mentioned bank finance and crowdfunding and equity, and those are really good sources of capital. Typically, I feel like in e-commerce, the best source of capital can be if you've got a good relationship with your suppliers and you can kind of build on the back of their balance sheet. What are some other strategies to potentially get into the territory of a negative cash conversion cycle?
Yeah. So what Joel's referring to in a negative cash conversion cycle is essentially, we spoke about the cash cycle being like the amount of days it takes for you to convert profit to cash. So some of the best businesses in the world have a negative version where basically the faster the more sales they make, the more cash that comes into the bank account. It's like the reverse. And so in circumstances like that, typically in e-commerce, some retailers have it. Gymshark actually has a negative cash conversion cycle. There's a few, I think there's a few large retailers that do it. Basically what they're doing is they're very strict in inventory management, so they don't want to carry too much stock. They might carry, between maybe 30 and 60 days of inventory, which is hard to do in itself, especially at scale. So they'll try to manage their stock. They probably don't have any receivables because they're just selling direct to consumer. But what they really do is really stretch out their suppliers. So they might pay their suppliers 60, 90, 120, even sometimes longer. I think Gymshark's had like 180-day terms with some of their suppliers, which is, I don't know how they struck that deal. It's insane. Goes to show the leverage that they have in the relationship, right? So, that is a strategy. I'm, like, everyone wants to do that. Obviously, I want to pay people late, like, if I can. You just need to balance it's all about partnership, right? Your suppliers are partners in your business and they're taking a lot of risk as well. Put yourself in their shoes, like, you want to get paid as well. So try to push out your payables as you can. And yes, you can finance growth through a negative cash cycle, but just tread lightly, I think, and just really establish trust and make sure you pay on time. Because the risk is that they go out of business because, they can't fund their growth and you're both stuck, right? Because that's your supply chain. So, yeah.
I think we'll just, for the sake of time, I think we'll wrap that up there. Does that sort of answer?
Thank you.
And I think that, it can't hurt to ask, probably, right? Or just shop around, see if there's anyone else who'll give you more favourable terms. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Yeah, thank you.
This is a question for whoever wants to take it, but there was a point on the key takeaways around make a profit on every sale. And I'm curious to know, how firm a belief is that for you guys? Does that hold true for things like first order discounts? Would love to hear you.
Unless you have a money tree or you're prepared to pay off a 20 to 30% debt strategy, you need to make a profit on every order. Because the minute you don't make a profit on the first order, you're banking on the second order. And the only time I would say that I would bank on the second order, if I was a business like HelloFresh, for example, where someone's signing up to a subscription, they're locked into the subscription, so you know when that second tranche of revenue is coming. But if you sell, for example, fast fashion, you can't really bank that second purchase is coming and when it's coming, because your competitor is going to potentially do a way better drop than you and get a better share of wallet. So for me, in all my businesses, it was first order profit. And if we couldn't do a first order profit, we had to look at either margin. So your levers are either, can we lift price without losing competitive edge in the market? Can we negotiate with suppliers and get costs down? Those are really your only two levers you can pull. And then obviously negotiating with your freight forwarders to see if you can pull any levers there. But you really, unless you got debt, you need a first order profit.
Yeah, just to tack on that, I don't know where lifetime value, how that entered retail environments. It's always been a SaaS metric because subscription. Yeah. And
when venture capitalists started investing in D2C businesses, they claimed that just like software, it's a repeatable purchase.
I had that happen in the US. I joined a VC-backed business in e-commerce and the VCs were asking me about LTV to CAC. And I was like, what? This is weird.
Yeah, we sell one-off products. Yeah, so that's how, it just turned into that. And actually, thankfully, because the market's corrected, everyone's going back to basics. It's like, hey, we need to make money on every order, right? Which has always been the case. Again, subscription products, yes, 100%. There's some form of LTV and you can actually track that accurately, measure it and rely on it. But, if you've got unpredictable sales, there's no point making money on every sale.
So with LTV, is that a 12-month metric? Some LTVs can go 3 years. So when do you draw the line on LTV?
Again, it depends on the product, right? What are you selling? Who gives a crap? I think they'll...
Really? Yeah. You just have to have your own calculation and justification. Yeah. sometimes it can be like your genuine perception of lifetime, what you think your customer will stay with you for. And yeah. Question.
Probably That's all right. I got that.
You sure? For
Oh,
our recording.
I can go louder. Probably dovetails a little bit off the question over there. From both a strategy and maybe an accounting point of view, how do you then deal with dead stock? Because almost every e-commerce business I've ever come across, not every product's a winner. So, is there a sort of a general strategy, and both from accounting and a sort of sales point of view, what do you do with stock that you just know is not going to move unless you either discount it, get rid of it? Like, what do you guys have a view on that?
Definitely have a view. I used to have 25,000 SKUs in my warehouse, so I know everything about dead stock. There's two things. I think the ad algorithms, because they optimize to the top 20%, often create dead stock in businesses if you're relying on the ads to actually power your business and your inventory assortment. So one of the quickest, easiest wins for a lot of businesses is just getting those dead product airtime. So it's about spinning off a supplementary feed in Google Ads, for example, setting up what's called a zombie campaign and allowing that zombie campaign to run with some budget and allowing the products to finally get airtime. That often helps to solve the problem, but don't go and buy them again if they're not clear winners and they're not profitable. Make sure you actually leave them once they've left the door. And then the other big thing as well with dead inventory, sure, you are going to potentially have to discount, but also sometimes it's also if you discount too late, you've missed the window. So if you're selling jackets and you only start discounting them on the last day of winter, you're unlikely to get the sell-through that you need, and you're going to have to go deeper on discount. So actually start thinking, if you're selling seasonal product, like what is that point where it's no longer as saleable, and start to cut your losses in a sense. Because I know inventory sits as an asset on your balance sheet, but if the inventory hasn't moved for 2 or 3 years, or even for some products 6 months, it's actually a liability. It's costing you money to store, and it's cost of capital.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. We've got lots of other events, whether webinars or in-person events coming up, so keep an eye out if there's anything of interest. Please eat some snacks, drink some drinks, network, and thanks again for coming. And thanks to our panelists, of course. Should say that first. Most importantly, thanks everyone.